soft hum of passengers boarding echoed through the airport gate. People shuffled forward, flashing tickets, lugging carry-on bags, eyes fixed on the promise of a comfortable flight. Among the crowd was a man who, to most, looked like any other traveler. He wore a simple polo shirt, faded jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. His steps were light, almost hesitant, as though he had no desire to draw attention to himself. That man was Manny Pacquiao, the boxing legend, the world champion, the senator of the Philippines. Yet, in this moment, there was no flashing camera, no cheering crowd, no roaring arena. There was only Manny, quietly holding his boarding pass and waiting in line like everyone else. As he approached the gate, the flight attendant glanced at his ticket and then at him. A brief smirk tugged at her lips. "Sir," she said sharply, "this ticket says first class. Are you sure this is yours?" Passengers behind him shifted uncomfortably, sensing the edge in her tone. Manny simply nodded, his face calm, eyes kind. "Yes, ma'am," he replied softly. But the attendant wasn't convinced. She tilted her head, scanning him from head to toe. "First class has a certain standard. I think there's been a mistake. Please step aside. We'll sort this out." Her voice was loud enough for others nearby to hear. A couple of businessmen in tailored suits glanced over, amused. One whispered, "He doesn't look like first-class material." Another chuckled. Maybe he got lucky with an upgrade. Manny didn't protest. He didn't flash his name or demand recognition. Instead, he quietly stepped aside, patiently waiting as other passengers streamed past him. His demeanor carried no anger, no pride, only humility. After a moment, the attendant returned with a forced smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but economy would be a better fit for you. Please follow me." Without hesitation, Manny nodded and walked toward the back of the plane. As he found a seat in economy, some passengers craned their necks, curious why a man with a first-class ticket was sitting in coach. Whispers spread quickly. Did he buy the wrong ticket? Maybe he couldn't afford first class after all. He looks ordinary enough. Manny sat quietly, folding his hands in his lap, his eyes thoughtful but calm. He didn't seem offended. Instead, it was as if he had expected something like this might happen. Meanwhile, the same flight attendant returned to first class, laughing softly as she spoke to her colleague. "Can you believe that guy? Trying to sit up here? First class is for people who belong, not for—" She stopped before finishing the sentence, but her meaning was clear. Passengers around her smiled awkwardly, some nodding in agreement. Others frowned, sensing a cruel arrogance in her words. Yet, through it all, Manny remained composed, a quiet presence among the chatter. He gazed out the small window beside him, the clouds drifting in the distance. Little did anyone know, in just 30 minutes, the man they dismissed as ordinary would leave the entire flight stunned, and the crew facing consequences they never imagined. The airplane cabin settled into its usual rhythm. Overhead bins clicked shut, seatbelts fastened, attendants moving briskly down the aisles with rehearsed efficiency. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet storm brewed. In the front of the plane, the flight attendant who had denied Manny his first-class seat leaned toward a colleague, her voice low but sharp enough to carry to those nearby. "Can you believe the nerve of some people, thinking they can just sit anywhere they like?" She rolled her eyes, clearly proud of her decision. Her colleague chuckled softly. "Well, at least you put him in his place." Passengers in first class overheard and smirked. One whispered, "You can always tell who doesn't belong. The clothes, the way they carry themselves, it's obvious." Another nodded in agreement, sipping his wine before the plane had even left the ground. Meanwhile, back in economy, Manny sat quietly. He adjusted his seatbelt and offered a small smile to the older woman seated beside him. She returned the smile, politely, but even she looked puzzled, glancing at his ticket stub peeking from his pocket. Across the aisle, a teenage boy tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom, that's Manny Pacquiao." His voice was excited but hushed. His mother frowned, not recognizing the name. "Who?" "The boxer," The champion. Look. The boy started to pull out his phone, but Manny caught his eye and gently shook, his head offering a kind smile as if to say, "It's okay, not now." The boy's eyes widened with respect, and he sat back in silence, though his admiration only grew. The minutes ticked by, and the attendants began serving drinks. When Manny politely asked for water, the same attendant approached with visible irritation. She placed the cup in front of him with a sigh, barely glancing his way. "Here, try not to spill it." The words stung those who overheard them. A man a few rows back muttered, "That's no way to talk to a passenger." But the attendant walked away without a second thought, her shoes clicking sharply against the aisle floor. Whispers began to circulate through the cabin. Some passengers chuckled, joining in on the mockery. Others frowned, uncomfortable with the way the situation was unfolding. Still, no one intervened. Through it all, Manny remained calm. He held the plastic cup in his hand, his gaze steady, his posture relaxed. There was no trace of anger in his eyes, only a quiet strength that seemed to grow with every insult. To those who looked closely, it was almost unsettling. The way he absorbed the humiliation without complaint, the way he chose silence over confrontation. It was as if he knew something no one else did, as if he was waiting. The flight attendant, emboldened by the lack of resistance, continued her whispers. "I knew he didn't belong. People like him. They think money or luck can buy them class. But it shows, doesn't it? Who's real first class and who's not?" Her colleague nodded, both of them chuckling under their breath. But as they laughed, a businessman in a pressed navy suit, seated just a row ahead of Manny, couldn't help but glance back. He studied the man who had been so easily dismissed, noticing his calm eyes, the quiet dignity in his manner. Something about him didn't add up. Leaning closer to his seatmate, the businessman whispered, "I don't think that man is who they think he is." And in that moment, the tension in the air sharpened. The audience, the passengers, and the viewers of this very story could sense it. Something was about to change. Manny Pacquiao was no ordinary passenger. And soon, everyone on that flight was going to learn exactly who he was. The seatbelt sign flickered off and the plane leveled into the smooth rhythm of flight. Passengers settled in with books, headphones, and the occasional polite chatter. In economy, Manny Pacquiao leaned back in his seat, hands folded gently in his lap, as though he were simply grateful to be on the journey. The businessman seated, a row ahead of him, kept glancing back, curiosity etched across his face. Finally, he turned around, offering a polite smile. "You seem very calm, considering, well, what happened at the gate." Manny returned the smile warmly. "No need to be upset. Life is easier when you carry peace in your heart." The man raised an eyebrow. His voice dropped to a whisper. "But she humiliated you. Most people would have made a scene. Why didn't you?" Manny shrugged lightly. "Respect is more important than pride. If I lose my temper, I lose both. But if I stay calm, maybe I can teach something without saying much." The businessman studied him for a moment, his suspicion deepening. There was something familiar in that voice, that composure. Just then, a small voice piped up from across the aisle. It was the teenage boy again who couldn't resist. "Sir, are you Manny Pacquiao?" His eyes shone with excitement, his phone half hidden in his hands. A few passengers perked up at the name. Some frowned, others chuckled dismissively. The attendant, overhearing, rolled her eyes. "Oh, please," she muttered under her breath. "Manny Pacquiao wouldn't be sitting back here in economy." Manny chuckled softly, raising a finger to his lips. "Shh. Let's keep that between us, okay?" He winked at the boy, who nearly burst with excitement but nodded eagerly, sealing the secret like a trusted friend. The boy's mother leaned closer, curiosity piqued. "Pacquiao, you mean the boxer? Is it really you?" Manny tilted his head, still humble. "Does it matter who I am? I'm just another passenger today." The mother looked embarrassed, unsure how to respond, but the warmth in Manny's tone put her at ease. Soon, conversation began to ripple through the rows around him. People asked where he was headed, what brought him on this flight, how he handled such rude treatment earlier. Manny answered with simple, thoughtful words. "I'm going home to see my family," he said softly. "Family always comes first." "What did you think about the way the attendant treated you?" someone asked. Manny paused, his eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes people judge by what they see, clothes, appearance, even the seat on a plane. But what they don't see is the story behind a person. Everyone has struggles. Everyone has victories. I don't hold it against her. Maybe she was just having a hard day." The businessman who had first spoken to Manny leaned in closer, now certain he recognized the man before him. "You talk like someone who's been through hardship. What would you say to someone who felt overlooked or disrespected?" Manny's eyes softened. He looked around the cabin, his voice gentle but powerful. "I would tell them this. Respect yourself first. Don't let others decide your worth. If someone treats you poorly, remember, it says more about their heart than about yours. Stay humble, stay kind. In the end, truth always comes out." His words hung in the air like a sermon, pulling the attention of those nearby. Even those who had laughed at him earlier fell quiet, suddenly unsure. At that moment, the same attendant passed by again, glancing sideways at him with the faintest smirk. But her expression faltered when she noticed how many passengers were watching, listening closely to every word Manny spoke. Something about the mood had shifted. The teenage boy, unable to hold back his admiration, whispered, "If I were you, sir, I'd have shouted at her right away." "Don't you feel angry?" Manny smiled gently. "What good would that do? Anger is like a fire. It burns the one who carries it more than the one it's directed at. Sometimes, patience is the strongest answer." His words landed heavy, resonating, deeper than he intended. Even the businessman found himself nodding slowly, reflecting on his own life. What none of them realized, however, was that the truth, the full weight of who this quiet man really was about to reveal itself in a way that would change the atmosphere of the entire flight. The patience and kindness Manny showed were not signs of weakness. They were signs of immense strength, and soon everyone on board would come face to face with that truth. The plane cruised above the clouds, the hum of the engines a soft, steady background to the quiet conversations that had begun to swirl around. Manny, passengers who had initially dismissed him as just another traveler now leaned in, curious about the calm, wise man in the economy cabin. Manny looked out the small oval window for a moment, the sky stretching endlessly beyond. He drew a deep breath, then turned back to the businessman and the teenage boy who had remained close by. "You know," he began softly, "life hasn't always been easy for me." The businessman raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Really? I would think..." He paused, searching for the right words. "Someone like you would have everything handed to them." Manny shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "No, nothing was handed to me. I grew up in a small, poor neighborhood in the Philippines. My family had very little. Most days we didn't know where the next meal would come from. I had to fight, not in the ring, but just to survive, to help my family, to show my little brother and sister that there was hope." The teenage boy listened wide-eyed, gripping his phone as if afraid to miss a single word. "So, you were always fighting?" he asked. "Every day," Manny replied gently. "Sometimes in school, sometimes in the streets, sometimes just in life. Poverty teaches you things no one else can. It teaches patience, resilience, and humility. It teaches you to see people, not what they have, not what they wear, but who they are." The businessman leaned back, now seeing Manny in a new light. "And the boxing? Was that your escape?" Manny nodded. "Boxing gave me a way to rise. But it wasn't easy. I trained before sunrise, worked odd jobs in the afternoons, and helped my family in the evenings. People would laugh, tell me I'd never make it, that I didn't belong in a world of champions. But I kept going. I believed that hard work, kindness, and respect could carry me further than anger or arrogance ever could." The cabin was silent now, the low murmur of the plane fading into the background. Even the attendants passing by seemed to slow, catching snippets of his story. Manny's voice grew softer, almost confessional. I've been treated unfairly countless times. People have doubted me, insulted me, and sometimes they've tried to humiliate me. But I learned something important. Their words cannot define me. Only my actions can. Only my heart can. The boy's mother, seated nearby, leaned forward. So, you never let it bother you? Manny smiled faintly. Of course it bothers you at first. Anyone would feel hurt. But pain can teach you lessons. Patience, humility, compassion, those are stronger than any anger. He glanced around the cabin, making eye contact with several passengers who were listening quietly. I tell this story not to boast. I tell it so you can understand that anyone you meet has a story you don't know. You may see someone struggling, someone seemingly ordinary, someone you think doesn't belong, but their journey is theirs, and their worth cannot be measured by a single moment, a single glance, or a single seat assignment. The businessman leaned forward, inspired. That's powerful. Most people would have yelled at that attendant by now. Manny chuckled softly. Yes, most people would. But I've learned that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's invisible until the right moment comes. The teenage boy's eyes sparkled with admiration. I hope I can be like that someday. You can, Manny said, smiling. It's not about fighting in the ring. It's about fighting for what's right in your life and treating others with respect, even when they don't treat you the same way. In that moment, the plane was more than just a mode of travel. It had become a vessel for empathy, understanding, and reflection. Every passenger who heard Manny's story felt the weight of his words. Some felt shame for their earlier judgments, others felt hope, and a few quietly wondered what might happen next. Little did they know, the moment to witness his true strength, the one that would shake the entire flight, was just minutes away. The murmurs of passengers filled the cabin as Manny's story settled into their hearts. Eyes that had once glanced dismissively now looked with curiosity, even awe. But the real turning point was yet to come. As the flight neared cruising altitude, Manny asked the flight attendant politely, "May I ask, what's been going on today?" His tone was calm, gentle, and without accusation. The attendant blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" she said cautiously, her voice slightly defensive. "I noticed earlier," Manny said softly. "There was tension at boarding. I just want to understand. Everyone has their story." A hush fell over the nearby rows. Passengers leaned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. The teen boy watched wide-eyed, his admiration growing by the second. The attendant hesitated, then sighed, her posture slumping. "It's been a rough week. My father's sick. I've been working double shifts. I didn't mean to." Her voice cracked. She looked down at her hands. "I was frustrated and I took it out on, well, everyone, including you." Manny nodded quietly, listening intently. "It sounds like you've been carrying a lot," he said. "That doesn't excuse rudeness, but it explains it." Passengers whispered among themselves, some surprised at the sudden vulnerability. Even the businessman, who had been skeptical, leaned back in reflection. Manny's eyes swept across the cabin. "Do others here know?" he asked, turning to the passengers nearby. A few shook their heads. He smiled softly, as if deciding something, quietly in his mind. Then, standing, he addressed the flight attendants collectively. "I think it's important for everyone to know. She's not lazy, she's not rude by nature. She's been carrying personal burdens that most of us could never imagine, and yet she still does her job. She works hard, under pressure, under stress, just like everyone else who has responsibilities to others." A stunned silence followed. The passengers' perception of the situation began to shift. Whispers of sympathy rippled down the aisle. Some passengers looked at the attendant with newfound respect. Some even smiled gently to reassure her. Manny approached the attendant and said, "I want to help, not to punish, but to support. Life is hard. It's harder when people judge without knowing the full story. The attendant's eyes widened. She shook her head, words failing her. I don't know what to say, she stammered. You don't need to say anything, Manny replied. Just know that compassion and understanding go further than anger ever could. And your honesty. Now that's bravery. Passengers began nodding and murmuring approval. A few who had been skeptical moments before were now quietly moved. Even the businessman admitted quietly to himself, I misjudged her. We all did. The teen boy, unable to contain himself, whispered, Sir, you're incredible. You didn't fight, you didn't yell, but you still made everyone see the truth. Manny smiled, placing a reassuring hand on the attendant's shoulder. Sometimes the strongest action is patience, observation, and understanding. That's the truth we all need to remember. Everyone has struggles. Everyone deserves respect. By the end of this revelation, the entire cabin atmosphere had shifted. Where there had been tension, there was now respect. Where there had been judgment, there was now empathy. The attendant stood taller, a faint blush on her cheeks, finally feeling seen. Not as someone who had made a mistake, but as a human being doing her best. In that moment, Manny Pacquiao's quiet wisdom transformed the flight. He hadn't needed to yell, threaten, or demand. He had revealed the truth. Kindness, patience, and understanding could open eyes far wider than anger ever could. Passengers would not forget this flight, not because of a fight or confrontation, but because of a quiet, humble man who reminded everyone of the power of seeing the human behind the action. The cabin remained quiet, but the atmosphere had shifted dramatically. Where tension and judgment had once lingered, a newfound respect and curiosity now filled the air. Manny Pacquiao's calm demeanor and thoughtful words had set the stage for something greater. Manny looked at the flight attendant, his expression warm and compassionate. You've been working under a lot of pressure, he said softly. I want to make sure that doesn't go unnoticed. Not just today, but every day. The attendant blinked in surprise. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling slightly. Manny smiled. I believe in action, not just words. So here's what we're going to do. He turned to the flight manager who had been observing the situation quietly. She deserves recognition for her hard work, her dedication, and her honesty. I want to ensure she's supported, not just by words, but by opportunity. Passengers murmured among themselves, astonished. Some nodded in approval, others whispered their admiration. Even the skeptical businessman was leaning forward, clearly impressed by Manny's humility and decisive kindness. Manny addressed the flight attendant directly. You're doing more than your job. You're showing resilience, courage, and integrity. That's worth more than anyone can measure. So I've spoken with the airline. They're going to make sure you receive proper recognition for your efforts and additional support to make your work easier. Her eyes widened, tears brimming. I don't know what to say, she whispered, overcome with emotion. You don't need to say anything, Manny replied gently. Just keep being the strong, kind person you already are, and know that people see you even when you think no one does. The other flight attendants, who had been quietly watching, exchanged glances. Some looked ashamed, realizing they had misjudged her. One of them, a senior attendant, stepped forward. I should apologize. We all know how hard you work. I didn't realize how much you've been carrying. The attendant smiled through her tears. Thank you. That means a lot. Manny didn't stop there. He turned to the passengers, his voice calm but commanding. I want everyone on this flight to remember this moment. Kindness and understanding are more powerful than anger or judgment. Treat each other with respect, because you never know the battles someone is facing. A ripple of applause began, soft at first, then growing louder as passengers expressed their approval. The teen boy clapped enthusiastically, eyes shining with admiration. Even the businessman, now fully humbled, gave a nod of respect. Then Manny did something unexpected. He personally handed the attendant a note of appreciation, expressing his gratitude for her honesty, dedication, and courage. "This is just a small token," he said, "but it comes with a reminder. Never underestimate your own strength and never doubt the difference one person can make." The flight attendant held the note close, tears streaming down her face. She could barely speak, nodding repeatedly, her hands shaking slightly. The transformation was complete, not just for her, but for the entire cabin. A place that had begun with tension, irritation, and judgment had become one of empathy, understanding, and inspiration. Passengers who had only expected a routine flight left with hearts touched, minds changed, and spirits lifted. Manny settled back in his seat, quietly observing the cabin. He hadn't needed to raise his voice or make a scene. His strength had been silent, empathetic, and transformative. He had reminded everyone on that flight that true power lies not in dominance but in compassion, in seeing others fully, and in acting with integrity. In that moment, Manny Pacquiao proved that a single person, with patience, understanding, and quiet courage, can spark a change that reverberates far beyond a single encounter. The hum of the engines continued steadily, but the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted completely. What had started as tension, frustration, and misunderstanding had now transformed into respect, admiration, and reflection. Manny Pacquiao leaned back in his seat, a calm but satisfied expression on his face. He had observed, listened, and acted, not with anger, but with empathy. The flight attendant sat a few rows ahead, still holding the note Manny had given her. Tears had dried on her cheeks, replaced with a small, humbled smile. She glanced back at Manny, her eyes filled with gratitude. For the first time in days, or perhaps weeks, she felt seen and valued, not just as a worker, but as a human being. Around the cabin, passengers whispered quietly among themselves. Some shared their own stories, realizing that they too had judged too quickly. Some simply nodded at each other, silently agreeing that they would carry this lesson beyond the flight. Even the skeptical businessman who had earlier rolled his eyes at the unfolding situation now leaned back with a reflective expression, silently acknowledging the depth of Manny's wisdom. Manny addressed the cabin in a gentle, steady voice, ensuring everyone could hear him. "I want everyone here to remember something important," he began. "Life is filled with challenges, pressures, and unexpected struggles. Often the people we meet are carrying burdens we cannot see. Judging them in a single moment, whether because of their behavior, their job, or a small mistake, is not only unfair, it robs us of understanding, compassion, and connection." A hush fell over the passengers as they listened. The teen boy from the previous rows leaned forward, his phone temporarily forgotten in his hands. "Sir," he asked quietly, "so it's about seeing the person behind the action?" Manny smiled warmly. "Exactly. Every person has a story. Every struggle is real, and every act, good or bad, is influenced by circumstances we may never know. The strongest and most important thing we can do is respond with empathy, not anger. Stand for respect, kindness, and integrity, even when others may not. That is the kind of strength that lasts." The attendant, finally finding her voice, spoke softly. I just want to thank you for seeing me, for understanding me. I didn't expect anyone to notice, let alone care." Manny nodded. "You don't have to thank me. What matters is that you keep doing what you do, but now with the knowledge that people can and will see your effort and your worth. Let that guide your actions, and let it remind you that even the smallest act of honesty, humility, or courage is never wasted." Passengers around the cabin began clapping quietly, then louder as the applause spread. Some stood up, offering words of encouragement to the flight attendant. The sense of tension that had filled the plane at boarding was replaced by warmth, connection, and a collective lesson in humanity. Manny leaned back, reflecting quietly. It was never about power or authority. It was about understanding, observing, and taking meaningful action. A simple gesture, a note of recognition, and a patient conversation had transformed an entire flight. That's the power of empathy. That's the power of listening. That's the power of treating others with dignity, no matter the situation. The teen boy, inspired, whispered to his mother, "I want to be like him. Calm, strong, and kind, even when others aren't." She smiled at him, realizing that lessons like this weren't learned in books but in moments of real human connection. As the plane began its descent, the passengers carried with them more than their luggage. They carried a story of respect, humility, and courage. A story that would inspire them and perhaps others they would meet. Manny Pacquiao had shown them that true strength is measured not in how loudly you can fight, but in how deeply you can care. Before stepping off the plane, Manny offered one last look around the cabin. The flight attendant waved, passengers smiled, and even the initially skeptical businessman gave a nod of respect. Manny whispered to himself, "It's never about winning the fight in front of you. It's about standing for what's right, every single time." The plane touched down, and as passengers disembarked, they carried more than memories of a flight. They carried a lesson in humanity. Manny had not just flown from one city to another. He had flown into the hearts of everyone on board, leaving behind a story they would never forget. If this story touched your heart, remember, respect, humility, and kindness can change the world one act at a time. Like, share, and comment. Your story matters too.